Dreading going to work tomorrow? At least you're not trying to smuggle alcohol in the 1920s. Hey there, welcome to another edition of the Sunday Scaries. I'm your host, Mike, and today we're going to be talking about the movie Mobsters, which was made in 1991. This film has a star-studded cast, including Patrick Dempsey, Christian Slater, and Anthony Quinn. This is a lesser-known film. It was made in 1991, and it's about Lucky Luciano and the 1920s and the rise of the Mafia. And this movie review will be spoiler-free today, but I will also be giving some history of the Mafia. So I'm not actually going to talk about a ton of the movie, but more of the history and what this movie is trying to build on. And for those who don't know the history of the Mafia, in the 20s, the Mafia, as far as the Italian Mafia, it was really just a bunch of gangs kind of spread out throughout the country, and it wasn't organized, and certain gangsters were more powerful than others, but the Jewish Mafia actually ran the underworld, and they actually mentored a lot of the young Italians. And what happened was in the 20s, Prohibition happened with alcohol, and people started hiring the Italian gangsters to smuggle it all over the country. And it created this huge industry, and the Mafia gained tons of money. We're talking about billions of dollars, and equivalent of today's dollars in terms of if you have inflation. And that's how the Mafia became powerful. Most people don't really realize if it was not for Prohibition, the Italian Mafia never would have been this big cultural phenomenon. We wouldn't have all these films. It would not be something that really would have ever captured America's imagination, because they just would have been low-level street gangs, and they probably would have had some schemes, but this really empowered them. And what happened was there's all these gang wars that this film actually covers, and Lucky Luciano is one of the most famous mobsters of all time, and he had a crew along with a couple of Jewish gangsters that he grew up with, and they rose to power together. And Lucky Luciano is actually the person that created the 5 families. And when you think of the 5 families, starting in the 30s is when they were created, it's a commission, and it's a government where the 5 bosses of the families get to decide everything that happens in the Italian Mafia through the entire country. Up until this point, they were just all these street gangs fighting each other, fighting over territory. But Lucky Luciano is the one that wanted to legitimize the Mafia, make it professional, make it a corporation. That's the way he envisioned it, because all the violence is bad for business. And so he wanted to share power with people, and it was something that no one really was familiar with at a time, because a lot of people were just trying to become the boss of bosses. And if it was not for Lucky Luciano, the Mafia never would have developed this corporate atmosphere. And all the Prohibition dollars they made, they invested into legitimate businesses, and that's how they became powerful. They invested into real estate, construction, unions, the garbage industry. They still had their low-level underworld sports gambling and loan sharking and things like that. But they invested it into tons of different things, so much so that in the 70s, when they made The Godfather, that the film production crew, because they wanted to film in New York, they actually had to work with the Mafia to get the rights to filming locations, because at the time in the 70s, the Mafia controlled so much of the land. And I think it's fascinating because so many people don't really understand what the Mafia is. They just think it's all these people like murdering each other and doing these like underworld crimes, but a lot of it was like white collar crime, for lack of a better way to explain it. And Lucky Luciano is the one who legitimized that. And this is not in the film, by the way, but years later, when World War II happened, Lucky Luciano was actually in prison, and the United States government had to cut a deal with Lucky Luciano because he controlled all the docks on the East Coast, and they had to let him out in order to get shipping over to Europe when we were trying to invade France. And he also, through his connections in Sicily, helped the military plan their invasion of Sicily. So that's how powerful Lucky Luciano was, and also how powerful the Mafia was. And granted, there's a lot of other famous gangsters in this film. I'm just talking a little bit about Luciano. Again, I'm not going to spoil too much in the movie. I recommend you watching it. It's it's not the best done movie in the world, but it's got a lot of history, and I think it's really good for people to know about. All right, guys, let's talk about a couple of the themes in the movie. And really, this movie is all about power, right? Luciano wants himself to be powerful, him and his friends, but he also wants the mafia to be powerful. And that's his whole goal in trying to create this organization and get rid of people that he feels that won't go along with it. And again, through this, from some of the points I already talked about, the mafia was able to control a lot of things in this country. And there's other things too. You know, there's a lot of links to them blackmailing President Hoover for having photographs of him with another man, because back then it was, you know, not okay to be gay. And they were threatening Hoover's political career. There's a lot of ties to JFK being assassinated. The guy that shot JFK was a known associate to the mafia. There's a lot of links to that Michael Jordan's father may have been murdered by the mafia. I mean, there's lots of different things that have gone on throughout time that are linked to the mafia's involvement. And they were so powerful that they could get away with a lot of these. And that ties into the theme of no laws. And in this film, you'll see a lot of this. There's a lot of people killing each other. They have their own code. They're not listening to the United States government. The mafia has its own laws and they're following them. And as a result, if you break those laws, you die. And they're self-enforcing that rule. And sometimes people get hurt in the crossfire as well, but they have no regard to American laws, and they operate their own way and they self-govern. And that's kind of a scary thing. We cannot be a lawless society. And it's crazy that the mafia was able to get away with that for so long. They really didn't lose power until the mid 80s and really weren't crippled until the 90s. You're talking about from like the 30s to the 90s, these guys were just self-running themselves, and really before that, but they weren't as powerful. But a 60-year period where they could do mostly what they wanted, that's really scary when you think about it, that a group of people was able to become that powerful and the United States government couldn't do anything about it. And the last major theme in this film is betrayal. Again, I'm not gonna spoil anything because I want you to go watch this film, but there's a lot of backstabbing that went on in the 20s and the 30s as the mafia slowly became a corporation, and a lot of the old gangsters and the young gangsters were going to war with each other, and a lot of promises were broken to each other, and a lot of the Jewish gangsters that mentored the mafia, the Italian Mafia, you know, there was some backstabbing going on there as well. So, you know, it's a very evil lifestyle in that you cannot trust anybody, and especially during this time period. And betrayal is just like one of the worst sins you can do to somebody. And the fact so much of it went on during this time period, you know, it really just, again, speaks to the evilness, and this movie captures a lot of that. All right, let's get into the rankings. And my overall ranking of this film is a 3 out of 5. It is a little cheesy. It's not the best film in the world, but I do think it's a good film just because I think they capture the history enough to where it's worth watching. And, you know, the actors are fun. Again, some of the dialogue is a little cheesy. It's got a kind of a low budget kind of vibe to it, but it's still a lot of fun, and I really enjoy all the famous actors that are in the movie. And there's more that I didn't even mention about. You probably will recognize quite a few of them. And as far as the fun meter goes, I also give it a 3 out of 5. You know, it's not, again, this epic mob story. It's not done at this high production value, but I do really enjoy it, and I do just love the character of Lucky Luciano. I don't think he gets enough attention in mafia and gangster history. People usually know his name, but there hasn't really been a great movie done on him so far, and I hope someday someone will do a great movie on him. And there's also other famous gangsters in it, like Al Capone, Frank Costello, Bugsy Siegel, just people like that are in it. So it's a lot of fun, and there is quite a bit of action in it, and there's this fun underworld politics going on, but I'd be lying if it's on the same scale of The Godfather or Goodfellas or one of those better known gangster films. But this one's definitely worth a watch, and I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. Please subscribe and follow. Please refer friends if they aren't already subscribed to my channel and you think they'll enjoy it. Write a comment too. I'd love to know what you think about the movie Mobsters. If you haven't watched it, go out and watch it and then come back and write a comment. I think it's a really interesting time period in the mafia's history, and I would love for more of you to know about it, for those who have not seen the film. And all I know is, at least tomorrow at work, I don't got anyone trying to kill me.